I've read 377 fantasy books, and these are my top 10 favorite books of all time. And let's start with the honorable mentions, because these books are 5-star reads. You absolutely need to pick them up, but I forced myself to keep it out of the list, but I love them, are fantastic. And let's start with the first one, which I've only read 2 books, and it's a long series of 14 books. It is a classic fantasy at its point, and it has a lot of different fans of it. I read it for the first time last year, and I was like, wow, I'm not sure why I did not pick this series before. I guess some part of me was expecting this series to be kind of like outdated, or not to be as good as it was, but I was mind blown by the depth of the characters, the amazing world building, the magic, and that is no other than Wheel of Time. I've only read book 1 and 2, but I already feel that this series is going to be one of my favorite series of all time. I just need to keep reading more in order to feel more. As the books progress, I'm feeling more and more in love and in awe about the characters and the way Drover Jordan is writing these books. I am reading a book a month with my Patreon, so if you want to join our quest, please join us. You will have all the information down below in the description, but this is phenomenal. I know a lot of you love it, and you were right. Continuing with another honorable mention, we have here a series that has the best magic system, in my opinion. It introduced me to fantasy in the proper sense with hard magic system, and it has such a good blend of characters that are very, very likable, but at the same time they are nuanced, and at the same time you have these highs, this very quick pace in the story, but the magic system, it just is to die for. But it is not in the list because I read it 15 years ago. Yes, friends, I counted it. And if you don't believe me, this is the first edition in Spanish, and I'm referring, yes, to Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is a story that I cannot forget, but at the same time, I just feel that it's been so long since I read it that I'm not sure if I will pick it up again now. I will feel as in awe as I felt 15 years ago. Absolutely loved the way in which we discover here Allomancy and how these different characters are able to ingest metals, and then those metals provide you with different powers, how we are fighting the oppressed, and the bad one is the one that has been ruling. It has been won for a lot of ages, and it is a fascinating read that I really recommend for everyone. Other honorable mention that took my breath away because it was savage, but at the same time it had a way of conveying emotions, of having really a fast pace, but a depth of the characters. It blew my mind. That is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I believe this author has this unique ability of really, from the first pages, translate really deep emotions, and I'm not sure how he's able to do that, because you definitely feel for the characters. The premise is fascinating because we start with this story in which society has been labeled in different colors, and depending on the color in which you are in a lower or a better side in the society, and we will be following Darrow, who is in the lowest side in the society. He's a red one, and he faces something and he will try to break down this system from within. First book changes really from the story that we definitely see in book 2 and 3. I have not continued with the rest of the series. That's why probably it's not in my favorite books of all time, because there's a part of me that I was not able to continue because my emotions really, they needed a break. I don't want to keep reading because I don't want to suffer, if that makes sense. Pick this one up if you're looking for something fast with very good characters and a story that you won't see coming. Next one I will mention, I bet you're going to be surprised because it's a blend between a cozy fantasy, but also it reads as a video game. It is a young adult story that has a special place in my heart. And although from the last time that I did this list, it was bumped to the honorable mentions, I really still love this story, and it's a story that when I think about it, I still have like goosebumps, and it's something that I really recommend for all of you if you want to read something that has such a tremendous world building and just the surrounding. It's a proper character, and that is The Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa. This story, basically, it's at its core a quest, and we will have like this sunshine versus grumpy kind of character, but there is so much more to it. We will have this girl that is half woman, half kitsune, and she will need to take care of a special scroll because if put together then something terrible will happen, and she's kind of like on the flee trying to take care of it, and she will cross path with the samurai, and he holds a secret because within his sword there's a demon that speaks with him. And this is a trope that I really, really love, like having terrible darkness beneath you, or in this case in your spade, in his katana, and he is able to talk with it, but it's also like corrupting. And it is lovely, but it has such a fast pace, and there were wars and wars, and it was so good. At the same time, it has just this ending that was surprisingly heart-wrenching, and I just fell in love with this story. Really recommend. It's not light, but it's easy to read, and although you will probably see it coming, you will want to read what comes. Next, I have a very, very, very short story that nonetheless marked me. It's a story that I believe it's perfect for everyone. Wait till the moment in which you feel you need a break, and then is the moment in which you need to pick this one up, because this story talks about life. It talks about passion. It talks about you feeling all right by not being all right with you fulfilling your mission in life, if that makes sense. Like, the main character is struggling. They have fulfilled everything that they wanted, but they don't feel as fulfilled. And that is a psalm for the wild build by Becky Chambers. The way in which this author writes, it's really a balm for my soul. This is classified as solar punk, which means that is this dystopian world where something terrible has happened, in this case the uprising of robots. But instead of having to deal with terrible consequences, in this case we need to deal with a world that is caring and that loves the environment, and that everything, it's very positive. And that's kind of like what we have here. We will follow the main character. They meet with one of these robots and how everything changes, and it is really, really easy to read, incredibly short. In just one sitting you will have it done, but at the same time it really made me cry. And if you pick it up in the moment in which you need it, it will be perfect for you. Something that breaks my heart is that I did not have any book from this author in the list, and I love all of his books. He is the king of standalones, and in my opinion, each book, it's so different to the other, but he is also such a master of being able to craft something that you can see while reading it. I really struggle with this, to imagine the things that I'm reading, but with this author, I am always able to see what he wants to portray. And this author is Neil Gaiman, and in here I wanted to bring The Ocean at the End of the Lane, but I also absolutely love Stardust. Completely different books, but in here you have a magical realism story where we will be following this character that he's an adult. He's going to his childhood house because of a funeral, and he will need to face the memories of when he was a child. And it's a look of childhood, trying to remember the things that he lived, but with almost an adult view. It just is such a weird experience, but it's beautiful because you see the sadness, the naivete, the hope, everything. It's blended together, and it's a story that I'm convinced would create something different in you depending on the moment in which you are reading it. But I've yet to meet the person who have picked up this book and have not fell in love with it. Also, Stardust is fascinating. It's completely different, but just it has all the good things, like that optimism, that quest and magic at its core that just it's precious to me. Another story that it's absolutely precious to me, and that it was the first one that brought happy tears to my eyes. It's a story that talks about really changing, about the power of magic, about the power of childhood, and how you can fall in love and change as a result. And that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This author has this unique ability also to talk about stories that are quite funny and lighthearted, but at the same time he has this dark humor, and there are moments that are quite emotional, and everything is blended in a way that feels heart-wrenching, and It's fascinating to read. This is also very, very, very easy. It will make you believe in magic in the sense of, wow, reading can also bring me not only these very deep emotions that I often love in books, and you will see that my list, it's full of those stories that are not so happy, but that at its core are creating a lot of emotions. But this one, it is happiness and cuteness and coziness, but at the same time, it's a really good story within this. So please pick this one up if you haven't already. I know it's hyped, but if you go with your expectations, like, this is a good book, but not like the best book in your life forever, then I think you will really, really, really enjoy it. The last honorable mention, I promise, it's a magical realism that it's a story that I have really, really, really close to my heart. It was so difficult for me to not put this book in the list, so kind of consider this as also one of my favorite of all time. It's a story that has one of the main characters that is more cute and more sweet and more naive, but at the same time he has so much courage that it's fascinating. It's a story that is written so differently to anything that I've read before, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This story mainly follows the point of view of Piranesi, and he is writing his own story. This formula of the character almost writing in a scientific way his discoveries made me feel this life can be fantastic. And although I don't live in a house that is as big as the world and that holds magic and powers and that I need to solve this riddle of life, I felt for the main character, and I felt that this was something that I should do as well. So really, really recommend. It's very low on magic. It's really more of a thriller, and what happens, it is so really, really recommend. And before we continue with my top 10, let me talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare. Thanks to them, I can really say that I've changed the way in which I read. I've always appreciated writing, and I've always felt that I missed some basics in my life. So I took together with my Patreons the class of creative writing. Now I'm able to know more from the beginning in which I pick a book. I'm like, these are the main motivations of the author, of the characters. This is how they are breaking the wall. This is how we learn. It has made me a better reader, and also I am starting to craft my own stories, which will never come to life, but I know you are creative. So if you're thinking that maybe you need that extra push in order to write and maybe hone a little bit more your skills, I definitely recommend the creative writing classes from Skillshare. If you want to learn about storytelling, about how to craft compelling characters by top tier authors, or how to create world building, then Skillshare is for you. It's the largest online learning community for creative people like you, and has launched these class collections that you can master any skills. They have a wide variety of topics ranging from illustration, graphic design, photography, productivity, reading speed, everything that you want. I will probably start another quest this month with my Patreon. So if you want to join us and learn more about writing or about reading speed, join us. I will link everything in my description, but the first 500 people who click the link will have 1 month free, which is more than enough time to check the classes to see if Skillshare is a platform for you, and then decide what to do from that point onwards. Really, really recommend, and thank you so much for checking my sponsors whenever I have them. In the top 10, we have a standalone that I just introduced into this list. I read it this year and I was mind blown by it, how the author is able to convey a beautiful story with some really heart-wrenching moments, and at the same time we have this blend of savage but also naive and a beautiful prose, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by B. Schwab. This author, it's not to be missed because she is unique. The way in which she writes will really, really, really touch you, and this story, it's phenomenal from the beginning. I know at the first pages while I was reading it that I was going to fall in love with the story. It's a different kind of story in the way in which it is told, because we will go through the life of Addie to the past and the present, different stages, different places, because at its core, our girl decided one day that she wanted to run away from her life, and she made a deal with the devil, and from that point onwards she is free, but at the same time no one remembers her. And this unique moment, it's crafting her life and how she moves through life through different really stages of time it's fascinating, and how she finds these different characters and she tries to make a mark. It was really a very profound story. It is quite sad, but at the same time it's just beautiful, and it has so many good moments. I really recommend, if you're looking for something that screams to read it slowly, to savor this story and to just fall in love with our characters. Top 9, we have a trilogy that completely broke my mind and my heart. It's actually a story that once that I read it, I threw the book to the wall, and I hated this story for 4 solid months, I believe. After I was not able to stop thinking about this, I reflected that maybe that's a good sign of a story well done, of a praise of the author to being able to put you in a place in which you want to root for our characters, for the story, and to want to manifest things that eventually might or might not happen, but it broke my mind. But it is so well done, and I loved this story to pieces, and that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This author, I've already said it before and I will say it again, has the ability of really conveying very intense emotions, and often negative emotions. I felt the anger that our characters felt, and it is mesmerizing how you're able to feel these strong emotions, this passion, this rage while reading. It's not a story that you will forget. I ended this trilogy and I was like, okay, let me now think how the story should have ended so that I could feel like differently. It starts in a way in which it will make you believe that it will go more into a dark academia kind of story, but it really quickly becomes a war story. So you need to be prepared to really read about the war, about the strategy of it, and about the horrors and the terrors of war in this not beautiful but really haunting story that I will be never the same thanks to it. Top 9, we have a completed series that I've only read 2 books, and it is so weird that it is here because I tried to keep away every story that is concluded, but I have not continued reading, because if I was not able to keep reading, maybe it means that I don't love it as much. No, this is not the case with this story. The idea of this is that I need to space it out a little bit because I was feeling a lot about it and I was really fascinated, and also this story really deserves its time. You need to pick this one up when you're ready to commit, to feel all the feelings and to learn a lot. It's a story that it's really different, book 1 from book 2. The first book has this pacing in which things happen so fast. Each chapter, it's a short story, and the chapters are incredibly short, which makes it for a book that it's very easy to read, but at the same time what you're reading, it's quite dense, or it can come across as dense. So it's a weird blend, but I promise you that it works. And that is The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. Just read book 1, Grace of Kings, and the second one, The Wall of Storms. Mind-blowing. The ability of Ken Liu to craft this story, it's just like, he is a genius. The amount of care and love and strategy that the author poured into this story, it's so difficult to pick places in this war that you will see unfolding and that you will see passing through different people and also through different generations even, and it really will take a place in your heart, and it will put the story there. Really recommend. Top 7, we have a concluded trilogy that fascinated me also from the beginning. It is deeply character driven, and although the premise didn't seem like something that I would love, it ended up being a massive surprise, and I loved these characters to pieces. I believe this author is also a genius, and she's able to craft a story that it's really about the strategy, about the family drama, about finding your own place and really fighting for your family. It is fascinating. And if you want drama, if you like to, cry, then I really recommend you to pick The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. It's a story that is pitched as The Godfather meets ninjas, and I can see why, but at the same time, I don't feel that's truly all that encompasses. I'm not a super huge fan of Godfather, but there is this mafia element because we were be thrown in this place called Keikon, and there are two main bands that are fighting for the control of the jade, which is this precious element that provides those who wield it with special power. So you can see why it is really coveted. But what we see, it's not really that fighting, but also how the story unfolds will make us reflect on one of these bands and how they're structured, how there's this treason, how each of them need to find a place, and it is fascinating. All of these books are a favorite for me, but each of them have kind of like these scenes that will completely break your heart and that will really, really, really make you reflect. And it is a testament of having great characters and just falling in love with all of them and make you reflect on who are you for loving these really great characters. Position number 6, we have a story that blends politics plus dragons plus adventure plus longing, and it will make you reflect. And it starts with the premise that an uprising has happened in order to defeat the ones that are really, really oppressing society. And now this new structure, it's kind of like more open to different layers in the society, but the result, it's not quite as we were expecting. And we will be following these two main characters that are friends since they are children, but their backgrounds couldn't be more different. They are at its core should be enemies, because one of these characters is an orphan. Her parents were killed by the dad of our other character, who is also an orphan because his parents were the ones that were oppressing society and therefore killed in the uprising. That makes for such an interesting premise, and that's no other than the Aurelian Cycle by Rosaria Munda. It's definitely a story that will transport you to a place where you will have everything. There are dragons that are really characters in this story. You will see how they interact with our characters, and one of the main characters, Annie, it's one of my favorite characters of all time because she wants to change things and she will need to sacrifice so much. It is fascinating how we are transported to a place in which we start from a competition in order to see who is the one that can have the control of the dragon fleet, to a place in which we need to think about the role of society and how we structure it. There are rumors of another uprising and another war coming. It is a story that also made me cry. I love it, love it, love it. Please pick this one up. Top 5, we have a standalone that it's so precious because it touches on some tropes that I really love, but especially the way in which the story is written, that it's what it steals the show for me. It displays this optimism, this positivism, and wanting to face life in a way in which it's better. It's, for me, a coping mechanism. Every time that I'm feeling not quite as good with life, I tend to go back to this author and to reread his books. In this case, we're talking about Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Here we have this story in which our character one day wakes up in space and he does not remember anything. That trope, it's really interesting, but he knows that he's on a mission, but everyone is dead. He is alone and he's like, what is happening? So he will go for a little bit trying to remember those pieces to put it together, but then it's a proper trip in which he is on that makes the story so phenomenal. There is something that happens that I don't want to unveil, that it's phenomenal. Also jazz hands, if you know, you know, but it is really a story that from the beginning, again, I knew this was going to be my favorite. I was dreading every page because I did not want this to end, but at the same time, I was so happy reading it. It had this blend of emotions that were like, oh, I'm feeling so good, but at the same time, I'm feeling so many things. Position number 4, I bet will surprise you because it's the only story in this whole list in which I've only read the first book in a series, and it's still ranked position number 4. How mind-blowing that is. It's the only one because only book 1 has been released, but I believe this story will become one of my favorites of all time if book 2 goes as things should happen. It's a story that it's very similar to Red Rising, but in my opinion, it's better. We have this society that has been layered in also different levels, but the magic system resides on that. So we have this layer, these pyramids, and the ones at the top are drinking power from the layers that are underneath. So it's a very unique setting because they need to take care of the layers underneath because their power goes through them, and if they die they won't have that power. And it has this Roman Empire setting as well. And there's these trials that the main character will need to pass, and that is The Will of the Many by James Islington. The way in which the story is written will fascinate you from the beginning. There are, I believe, 3 scenes that are like epic, very epic. It's not just the ending that is like, oh wow, but there were like a lot of scenes that while you're reading it, you're like mind blown, absolutely incredibly amazing. The ending though will get you down the rabbit hole of searching what is happening, what is it that you're reading, and it just is such a good blend of fantasy with all the elements. Book 2 will be released this year, so pick this one up. It's the best moment. Position number 3, we have another standalone by an author that is such a hidden gem. This is so underrated and unfair, and I am enraged about that. In here we have a story that really seems weird, but it really works from the beginning. Like first 20 pages, I knew in my bones that this was going to be one of my favorites of all time. Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Reading this feels as if you're reading Pride and Prejudice, and then you take our main character, Emily Mashwick, and you throw into war. It has also a slightly different way of sharing the story because we start at the middle of the war, something terrible happening, and then you go back and you see this Victorian society, this more tranquil life, and you get to see how our character is thrown in the war, and that makes you really love and see how precious the proper story is. And it's a story that for me takes every trope that it is and it just breaks them and remold them. You have, yes, The Chosen One, but it just breaks it. Love Triangle breaks it. Going to war, even facing war, and breaks it. It's a story that really depicts amazingly PTSD, what are the horrors of war, and I love this. I read this book recently this year due to my Patreon and the book club, and I was really mind blown, and it really consolidated this story. It was better the second time around. Really hope that you can pick it up and love it as much as I did. Position number 2, we have another standalone that has my second favorite magic system, which is elemental magic. In this case, we'll have ice, we'll have wind, and we will have a story that it's deeply character driven, but at the same time it has some scenes that are as good as ones that you can read from Brando Sando, which is mind blowing. It's a story that has also a slightly different tone, prose, because it has like the main thing, or a lot of stuff happens at mark 40% of the book, and you are still with 60% of the book and you don't know what will happen next, but trust me, things work. It is a phenomenal story that depicts the story of a mother and a son, and in here we are talking about The Sword of Kagan by Emma Wong. This story, it will take you maybe a little bit more to get into it. It's not a story that like from the beginning you know it's going to be a new favorite, but if you continue reading, then I bet this will become one of those stories. It's that good. In this case, we'll have this land called Kagan, and they are the last resort towards an invasion, and then one day something happens and they are the only ones that are still kind of like living through the teachings of the samurai. And what you will see, it is fascinating scenes. It has one scene that I never cried more with a book in my life. I don't necessarily want you to suffer, but I do want you to suffer. Please pick this one up and feel what I felt, and please come back and let me know if you've loved it as much as I did, because it is fascinating. It mesmerized me, and I will always read whatever this author writes. In the top 1, we have my favorite author writing a masterpiece that got me not only with tears in my eyes, but it's the best ending that I've read in my life. There were some scenes that are so epic, and this author is famous because of his endings, and this story being book 3 in a series that isn't finished, it really had a lot of elements, but it had so many good things, and it is fantastic. That is Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. So book 3 in the Stormlight Archives series. This story is phenomenal, not only because it is high fantasy, which I love, and it is epic, and at its core we are talking about the fight between different races, but because the main characters are really nuanced and they are depicted in a way in which you feel that they are relatable, depicting characters that really struggle with depression, with anxiety, with your personality. I don't believe that's easy, and the way in which it is done here, you feel for the characters from the beginning, and this is why I love this series so much, because these characters, I would not die for them, but I would pay money for them to be good. There are a lot of stuff that I want for them. I think about them. They feel real, and I feel for them every time that they are on the page. I am with them, suffering and living, and I cannot wait to see how the story unfolds. This is phenomenal, and if you know with this book, but amazing. World building, magic system, it's also pretty incredible. It goes like through layers. You need to be good or to commit to the magic. You will discover it as you go, but it has such good depictions, and everything is so well crafted. The story, but also the land, the economy, the everything, like the flora, the fauna, everything is depicted. It is outstanding. It has a massive world building. It is part of the Cosmere, and it is obviously very Cosmere aware, the later books more than the first books, but it is fascinating. Would I recommend you to start with Stormlight? Maybe not. Start with Mistborn, but please go to Stormlight as soon as you can, because this is such a good story, and I believe you will love it. Let me know down below which are your favorite books of all time. I know this is hard. It took me 40 minutes to decide that. And if you want to see which are my favorite standalones of all time, I will link here the video so that you can check that out.